Okay, so here's a brief summary of some of what I said last time, the historical background. Uh, I talked about how the French and the British had imperial aims in the Middle East and really elsewhere too. I mean, they really were very eager to compensate for the losses of the war by somehow gaining territory and improving their imperial future. Um, there were two treaties that emerged for this region after the war. The first one, the Treaty of Sevres, which established a division of the territory that didn't last. This is a different map from the one I showed last time, and it shows even more detail about the different parts of the Anatolian region that were allotted to different European countries. The zone of the straits up here, Istanbul and the Dardanelles and Sea of Marmara, this was under international occupation, and that also applied to part of Thrace, the Allied occupation that I spoke of in my presentation on Thrace. The Greek zone, part of it was to be under direct control. This is actually the territory that Greek forces controlled, and then they were allotted a larger territory, which they didn't yet control, but was supposed to be under their influence. All this was supposed to be an Italian zone. Um, then the French zone I've talked about, it was more than just Cilicia in this region, it extended way up here into central Anatolia. And there's a distinction between the French zone of influence and the French mandate. And this gets very complicated, and I won't try to go into all the details. But the mandates were awarded by the League of Nations somewhat later. Uh, but the Treaty of Sevres established these areas of influence. And you see here, this area was something I didn't mention last time. There was a Kurdish region established here around Diyarbakir, area still populated by a lot of Kurdish people. It's part of Turkey now, and there's been a long-standing state of conflict and violence between Turkish forces and a sort of Kurdish nationalist independent movement. They were accused of being separatists, and there was a war actually that went on for about 15 years, and it's still a very tense situation. You notice also that Armenia here is quite large compared to the presently existing state of Armenia. It included this portion of what's now eastern Turkey. Trebizond and Erzurum are now in Turkey, but they were allotted to Armenia by the Treaty of Sevres. Turkish nationalists led by Mustafa Kemal succeeded in basically overturning the provisions of this treaty. And the results of their efforts were later codified in the Treaty of Lausanne in Switzerland, 1923. Now, getting back to the question of French territory, the French under the Treaty of Lausanne did keep control over Syria and Lebanon. That is, Syria as it was defined under this treaty. It was not the original Turkish province of Syria, but the part north of the Sykes-Picot line that was defined by the agreement between Britain and France. Cilicia originally was part of the French territory, but that was taken over. They simply were driven out by the Turkish forces, Turkish nationalists. Now back to Syrian stamps. This is a stamp of 1940, which is a very nice picture of the ruins of Palmyre. You can see quite a few columns standing there. I'm afraid a lot of those have been torn down, the attack by the Islamic State somewhat pulverized the ruins that were already in a state of decay. This is a nice little painting of Queen Zenobia. I've found it somewhat amusing that this painter's name is Schmaltz, a term that to me kind of corresponds to the style of his picture. This is Queen Zenobia on stamps. These are from 1962, 63. And portrayed as a rather feminine-looking person with a spiky helmet. Um, you notice here, by the way, that the inscriptions are no longer in French. The stamps from Syria of the 1920s and 30s were inscribed in Arabic and French. These are in Arabic and English, which I suppose had more or less usurped the role of French as the international language by that time. Here's some more nice stamps. These are, of course, these were produced in Paris, nicely engraved stamps showing an interesting fortress. Um, let's see if I can, my toolbar is covering up the inscription there. Well, you can read it. Qasr el Hayr Castle. This is out in the Syrian desert now, quite a desolate spot. Uh, I would imagine, the climate may have been somewhat different back in those days. And when Palmyre was flourishing, it's out in the desert too. This place is 80 miles southwest of Palmyra, and it's still standing, um, but just an ancient ruin at this point. Okay, so Syria had a nice history of issuing airmail stamps, and these are examples of the first issue. They're not the first three, but the second set of three. I don't have numbers one, two, and three, but I have these, which have the same overprint, the post par avion, on stamps that had already been overprinted with the occupation militaire française. Uh, these were only used on one for one type of flight from Aleppo to Alexandretta. There was one airline that transported postage and transported the mail and used these stamps. This is not a cover, actually, it's a sort of a fragment. You can see from Alexandretta to somebody, Monsieur Ahmed, looks like Ahmed Mihad of the Telegraph Civil. Of course, there are forgeries, counterfeit overprints here. I looked up, I tried to find some information about the overprints, and according to what I saw, the overprints that have this break in the line at the top, here's, and you can see it clearly here. These are supposed to be the originals. When you see counterfeits, they usually don't have that. The overprint is also on these 1 piastre on 20 centime stamps, but it's very faint. I thought at first that it might be only overprinted on this one and missing from this one, but no, that it does. If you look carefully enough, it is on this one as well, very faintly. Here are the airplane overprints. Dan showed us one that was overprinted for Alawite, but these were for Syria. Alawite, by the way, is simply a district of what is now Syria that was separately administered and had its own stamps for a brief period. Here's an inverted airplane overprint. This is the only one I have. Most of the stamps in that preceding set do exist as inverted, and they're worth about 10 times as much as the regular stamps. This is another set of nice-looking airmail stamps. This is another engraved set. It's the airmail portion of the set that I showed last time. I showed a set issued in 1934 that showed the Parliament building of Damascus, a Syrian poet, the president, and then the famous Saladin, medieval warrior of Syria. So this shows a village, Blue Dawn. I had never heard of it before, but I looked it up, and it's a nice looking place, and up against the hills there. This is from another airmail set, which used these two designs. Two images. On the left is Aleppo, and on the right, Damascus. The one showing Aleppo is a very strange image to me. I've had that stamp in my collection for a long time, and it looks more like a volcano than a city.
That's the citadel in Aleppo. It's
Yes,
like that. It's quite astonishing.
Yes, well, here is a picture of the actual place. You can see that and it's actually, I mean, it's formed by a natural geographic feature, a plateau there, a raised plateau in the middle of the city, surrounded by lower uh, elevation territory. Um, Very ancient place, and you can see that, you know, if you took an aerial photograph from an angle, you'd get the kind of image that is on the stamp. This one on the left. Um, So, of course, this place, this famous, and this is a UNESCO heritage site. It's a very famous place, very, very ancient. Goes back to about 700 CE. It's been damaged too as a result of the war. Uh, Very unfortunate. Here's a quote from 2015. The great citadel of Aleppo has the grim distinction of being the world's only ancient fortress that is back in the action today as a garrison and artillery battery in the war. The ruins of arsenals, dungeons, and palaces from earlier centuries, troops loyal to President Bashar al-Assad are wreaking destruction on enemies in the plain below, as though the Middle Ages had never ended. Here's another airmail issue. This is a souvenir sheet commemorating the 10th anniversary of a flight from actually from Beirut to Marseille. And of course, Beirut is now in Lebanon, which is a separate country. Originally, the two territories of Lebanon and Syria, which were both part of the French mandate, were administered together. But then, about 1924, they were separated and started issuing their own stamps. This is the stamp, and if you look very carefully, you can see there are dots along the line there of the route of the flight. Um, Over on the far right are two dots. There's Beirut on the coast, but then just, you know, inland from Beirut is Damascus as another dot. Now, um, as you say, the stamp was postmarked in Damascus and got from Damascus to Beirut by some means. Maybe it was by flight. The flight is famous for being from Beirut to Marseille. I don't know why it's described that way if it started in Damascus, but there were several stops. There's one, if that's a stop, that would be on one of the Aegean islands.
Roads, I think.
Look like Rhodes, right? Then here would be Athens, Rome, and finally Marseille.
Maybe Corfu in between.
Would be
Yeah.
this is where Corfu is.
Yeah.
If
And
that's a
it looks
dot,
like there's a dot there too.
that could well be. Okay, now on to Cilicia. Um, this is the next major stamp issuing area that I want to talk about. Uh, this map will show, this is my map showing the various parts of the French area. Um, and again, the red line on this is the present boundary of Turkey. It now includes this district, which was part of Syria. This is Alexandretta. There's this city of Alexandretta and this whole district, the Sanjak of Alexandretta, which was later named Hatay and became part of Turkey. But Cilicia is here, and it's a really loosely defined area. It was not one of the Ottoman provinces. It's an ancient term referring to this part of the world between the Taurus Mountains and the Mediterranean. This was actually the location of an Armenian kingdom, which I was surprised to learn. Flourished roughly 1200 to 1375. And a large Armenian population remained after the Ottomans took over. Now, we all know that starting in 1915, there was the Armenian Genocide, so called, in which many Armenians were killed or driven out by the Turkish army. There was a real animosity between the Turks and the Armenians, especially, I mean, on the Turkish side anyway. The Armenians were accused of being like traitors or national enemies and of giving aid and assistance to Russia. And Russia has been, above all, the traditional enemy of Turkey. There have been many conflicts and wars between Turkey and Russia. And of course, there's also a religious difference. The Armenians, like the Russians, for the most part, are Christian. In 1919, after the war, the French invited Armenian refugees to settle in Cilicia under their protection. However, that didn't last. When the Turkish nationalists began their campaign to reclaim Turkish territory, Cilicia was their first target. Um, their prejudice against the Armenians was compounded by that time by fear of revenge for the genocide they'd already committed. Unfortunately, French forces were outnumbered and the Turks took over Cilicia town by town. So, just to go into the details of the French occupation, November 1918, just at the very end of the war, Turks surrendered on board a ship, the Agamemnon, which was in the harbor at Mudros on the island of Lemnos in Greece. And at that point, British forces were occupying parts of Cilicia. But according to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the territory was supposed to go to the French. And so the British basically turned over the control of it to French forces, who landed at Mersin on the sea coast, on the Mediterranean coast, and later set up their headquarters in the major town of Cilicia, which is Adana. Well, by February 11th, 1920, Turkish forces dealt a major defeat to the French and Armenians. There was a French-Armenian legion formed of volunteers to Armenians fighting with the French at a place called Marash, which is in the eastern portion of the area of Cilicia on my map. It's now called Kahramanmaraş, basically in honor of this battle. Kahraman is a word meaning hero or heroic. So then after that, the French forces gradually began retreating from Cilicia until October of 1921, the Treaty of Ankara. Under the Treaty of Ankara, the French agreed to leave Cilicia altogether. But they retained at that point Alexandretta, which didn't become part of Turkey until later. Well, finally, we get to some stamps. These are Turkish Ottoman Empire stamps of 1913, overprinted with this rather crude overprint Cilicia. When I first saw these stamps, I thought they were horribly ugly. The stamps, which I'm actually very fond of these stamps, they're more or less defaced in many cases by the overprint. They used a kind of ink that soaked into the paper. You can see it here, especially on this 4-para stamp on the second from the right. And the same effect occurs on others. It's here and here. So I kind of it's surprising now that I've become an avid collector of these, which I thought were so hideous at first. There are many varieties. For example, the upside down overprint. As far as I know, there are no errors of spelling or anything like that, but you find the overprints in the wrong place or upside down. Here's a survey of the different types of stamps issued for Cilicia. 6 different types of overprints, which we'll see in sequence. And then after they used up the Turkish stamps that were available, they began overprinting French stamps. That only lasted a brief time before the French actually departed from Cilicia. So here are more examples of overprint type 1. Again, you see some collectible varieties here, the upside down overprints here and here. They used whatever Turkish stamps were available, just gathered them all up and overprinted them this way by hand. Here are some more. This set of stamps I think is somewhat interesting. The one on the far right appears to me as though it must be a forgery. Notice how the ink seems different and the letters are taller, especially the C is much taller than on all the others. So I don't have any philatelic literature about this overprint, but I strongly suspect that this one on the far right is a forgery. Here's the second overprint. It's the same thing, only the letters are smaller. Offhand, you might not even notice a difference, but if you compare them side by side, you can see that the letters here are smaller. They used the same ink again that penetrated the paper in some cases. This one's canceled in Mersin on the seacoast. This is where it's one of the two places that were most active in the use of the mail from Cilicia under the French occupation. More of the second overprint, including some doubles. Here's a doubling on the top right, and two overprints here, one of them upside down. You have to think that in some cases, the guys doing the overprints were getting bored and just decided to make a few varieties for fun. This is the third overprint, again, still using the ink. Of course, the penetration of the ink into the paper is partly the fault of the paper. It was rather porous paper. So with the ink they used, if they had a heavily inked stamper, it left, the ink soaked into the paper all around it. Some of them are lightly overprinted, like the third one here. Just must have had less ink on the on the device. This stamp shows Sultan Muhammad V. He was still the reigning Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at that point, although his powers were considerably reduced from what the Sultan's powers had been as a result of the 1908 revolution and the establishment of the first constitution in Turkey. His powers were greatly cut back, and the government was actually being run by members of a political party known informally as the Young Turks. The Committee of Union and Progress was their formal name, and we'll hear more about them later. More of the third overprint. Here on the center stamp, you see part of the overprint that was supposed to go on the next stamp, but this is the kind of thing that would naturally happen with hand overprints. Here again, you find some varieties. The upside down overprint. It looks like it's upside down and doubled. This must have been a lightly inked hand stamp, which then got repeated. And down here again, another doubling. Something I find curious about this is that some of the overprints seem to have an extra bit of ink at the far right. This one looks like it almost has an S on the end, or what looks like an S. It's not. I mean, it's simply the name Cilicia. You see the same blob of ink. See over here, there's another blob of ink, not as much as the first one, but something about the device must have created that extra marking.
The overprints, various overprints are listed, and they run from 2 to 4 times the cost of the single.
Right. You mean the doubling?
Yes.
More varieties on postage due stamps. These are Ottoman postage due stamps with this center pair here is upside down, and this is the side-by-side overprint with one inverted and the other one right way up. Same thing here. I can only assume that these were created intentionally in order to create, collectible varieties. But here I am collecting them, so I find it fun to see if I can assemble varieties like that. This overprint, for some reason, was only used on one stamp. This TEO, Territoire Ennemi Occupé. It's a nice looking overprint, and I don't know why they didn't use it more, because they kept with the initials TEO for military occupation in the next overprint, TEO Cilicia. With this one, you start to get spelling varieties. What I've got here, I mean, I think all my varieties are this is the one on the left here is the correct spelling, Cilicia. This one has letter T substituted for I. So it's Ciltcte. You can see that perhaps more clearly down here on the lower right. They must have run out of, they've got one I here, CIL, and then TCTE. I believe there are other misspellings as well, but these are the only ones I have. And of course, on the upper right here, we have a doubling with one right way up and the other overprint upside down.
These are not listed by Scott, those misspellings.
Well, again, more of these overprint type 6, is it? TEO Cilicia. This one's got a doubling with one of them upside down. Now, this one is interesting. It has the same, it has a TEO on the bottom and Cilicia on the top. Clearly, that would come about if the overprint was displaced. You know, the word Cilicia that went with this overprint would be down here somewhere on the next stamp. And similarly up here, this is the Cilicia from the overprint on the upper stamp above it. And more varieties. Here's the normal one. Here's upside down. And here's one with TEO in rather clear dark letters and a very, very faint Cilicia down here. It's not missing. You can see just a faint bit of it, but it must have been simply under inked on that part of the stamp. And here again are my revenue stamps, the cigarette paper tax stamps with their varieties. You know, I tried to magnify this image. I can magnify it a little bit, I think. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see on the second one here, not only is it doubled, but the letters are wrong. It's OCCPATION, substituting a C here where an O belongs. And let's see if I can I maneuver over to the others? Yes. Okay. This has a double overprint with one of them inverted. So you get occupation here and here as well. And you've got the 70 right side up and upside down, and the other parts of the overprint as well. This one is on a three and a half piastre overprint. There were two values, 70 paras and 3.5 piastre. And this one has the overprint doubled and one inverted. And this, yeah, there's also a frame line here, this blue line. I believe, and this is part of the overprint, which doesn't show up on most of them. But once in a while, you see these blue frame lines. This must be from the stamping device. And it comes up again on the next frame. This is another set. These are all the 3.5 piastre stamps. This is the correct form of the overprint. Here's another misspelling. We've got OCCUPTTION here. Another, these various misspellings are listed in Scott, and you know, they're not exactly extremely rare, but they're considerably more valuable than the standard overprint. Here's this one simply has the overprint inverted, and this one has double overprint with both of them inverted, unlike the previous ones that had one right way up and one inverted. And once again here, the cancellation, the only two cancellations you're likely to see on these are Mercine and Donna. Now here are the French stamps. They started off simply TEO, territoire occupé, ennemi occupé, and soon went over to the occupation militaire française for military occupation in both cases. This is somewhat interesting. This set was prepared but never issued, and it has this curious phrase, abbreviation, Sand Est, standing for Sanjak de l'Est, which means, you know, Eastern District. These apparently were issued, were prepared for use in a part of Cilicia that the French lost control of rather early on. The Turks had already taken over the area in the eastern part of Cilicia where these were supposed to be used, and so they were never put into service. And the final type 4 of the OMF Cilicia overprints. Okay, well, end of story for now.